was once a safe town where nothing exciting ever happens. But then one day, it was almost as if Hawkins became cursed. But why? Maybe we'll never know for sure. But let's learn a thing or two here on the Hawkins Files. Hey guys, welcome back to another video here on the Hawkins Files, and in the last video, we finished off our recap of Season 2 of Show in Question, Stranger Things, and today, we're going over Season 3. Season 3 is a very exciting season. It's taking place in the summer of 1985. It's right before Independence Day. It takes place on Independence Day, and even jumps in time at the end for a big ending that we'll get into near the end of this video. Now, to start off, the start of episode 1 for season 3, the Russians are in effect. They're trying to build a key to the Upside Down. Now, they initially start in Russia, but it turns out this isn't going to work because we get a flashback of June 1984. So before the events of season 2 even happen, they're making a key. Then they're given a year to build the key that actually works, that can successfully get to the Upside Down. And then later in the episode, we are revealed that they actually go to Hawkins, Indiana, specifically to build this key once again. Now, another important part of this episode is Mike and Eleven, since they've reunited at the end of season 2, have gotten a little bit more romantic in their relationship. They're making out all the time. They neglect their friends to be with each other at all times, which I guess is decent for relationships, but it can get to a certain extent after a while. And then, as this is happening, Dustin has just returned from Camp Nowhere, where it's like kind of like this science camp, and he also happens to meet his love of his life, Susie, which we don't actually meet till the end of the season, and kind of has a little bit more of a role season 4, but we'll get into that in the next episode of this podcast. Since Dustin has come back from camp, he has this radio that he wants to set up at the top of a hill in Hawkins. It's the highest hill in Hawkins that can literally radio any place in the world. And he uses it to talk to his girlfriend, Susie. And he's trying to get all of his friends to get up there. Unfortunately, they don't really want to have the patience to stick around, so most of them leave, Mike and Elle included. They don't even get to the top, and Mike and Elle are already leaving, supposedly because of a curfew. And in this case, after they have all left, Dustin ends up hearing a Russian message from the radio, and this kind of gets their mind rolling, like, what are the Russians doing in Hawkins? Like, what does this message mean? Now, Hopper, throughout this episode, isn't happy about how close Mike and Elle have gotten, so he decides he's going to have a talk with the two of them, but then he kind of deviates from that, takes Mike out to the car. He starts yelling at Mike for it, and so now, if Mike doesn't back off, Hopper's going to force them to break up, which neither of them want that, but they're going to have to kind of slow things down if they want to keep it that way. At the end of the episode, Billy Hargrove from season 2, brother of Max, he ends up getting possessed by the Mind Flayer, and it's revealed the Mind Flayer is still going to be the main villain of season 3. Moving on to episode 2, we have Nancy and Jonathan investigating local woman Miss Driscoll's house because she's talked about these rabid rats that are eating fertilizer. So it's that's something that they have to investigate to kind of figure out what's going on there. And in effect, for Hopper yelling at Mike, Mike is assuming he can't really spend time with Elle. So he kind of ghosts her in a way, or it's like they're used to seeing each other every day. So when he doesn't show up to the house, Elle decides to call to figure out what's going on. That doesn't go well. So Mike just decides he's going to just kind of go about his own day. And Elle, she's not happy about this. So she goes to Max, try to figure out, what does this mean? And then they end up having this bonding time. They go to the mall. Then they run into Mike, Will, and Lucas trying to buy a gift for Elle to kind of fix the problem. Doesn't go well. Eleven ends up dumping Mike, and then ends up being saddened for the remainder of this episode and kind of into episode 3 to kind of like figure out what's going on. Now, throughout this episode, it's revealed that magnets around Hawkins they're not sticking on like they're supposed to. And Joyce happens to see this. So she goes to Scott Clark, the science teacher at Hawkins Middle School, kind of try to get some answers out of Scott Clark, try to figure out what's going on there. In effect of this, it ends up standing up Hopper because Hopper originally set up a date between the two of them. Specifically at dinner, he specifically says it's not a date, but then you kind of get to the end of the season, and it's kind of like you could really see the intentions for that. Steve now works at Scoops Ahoy at the mall. It's an ice cream shop, and Dustin goes there with his coworker Robin. All decode the Russian message. It's revealed they're in Hawkins, and they're at the mall. They just need to figure out what in the world they're trying to do. Okay, episode 3. 11 uses her powers to spy on the boys after the breakup, and they say kind of these disgusting things, kind of like also saying, why are they being treated this way? 11 also decides to spy on Billy, figure out what he's doing, and it's showed that Billy's doing something to a woman, or like a teenager, that isn't normal. Elle gets very concerned about it. Okay, once again, Nancy and Jonathan go to Miss Driscoll's house, and they find her eating fertilizer, just like the rats were, and it's kind of looking like she's also going to be possessed by the Mind Flayer. Now, with the boys broken up with their girlfriends, Elle and Max, Will brings into the effect that they can start playing Dungeons and Dragons again. But they're not really interested, and Will gets very upset. He leaves the house, even while it's raining outside, and he heads to Castle Byers, and he's looking at old pictures of their childhood, and he's very upset about it. So he ends up destroying Castle Byers, which is a very sad sight, because that's been like a core location since season 1. Joyce, she kind of takes the information she learned from Scott Clark to Hopper, even though Hopper's still upset for him being stood up. Then they end up going to Hawkins' lab to investigate, figure out if any lab personnel is still there, trying to recreate the gate, but nothing's there. And then they end up hearing a noise within the lab. It happens to be a Russian guy named Grigory. Completely beats up Hopper, and it leaves Hopper unconscious. Joyce tries to read like the license plate on his motorcycle to try to figure out if they can find the location of where he is. After Will destroys Castle Byers, starts to feel the Mind Flayer again, and that's when it is truly revealed that Mind Flayer is still alive. And into episode 4, we learn that the mayor, Larry, he has been selling land or properties to the Russians to where they can actually use these properties to build the supposed weapon that they're trying to build for the key to the Upside Down. Except they don't really know it's going to be a key to the Upside Down quite yet. In the mall group, Dustin, Steve, Robin, and even Erica, Lucas's sister, finding an elevator below the mall, and it just starts going rapid fire. It's going like probably like 80 miles per hour, just straight down. And they end up in this Russian base. And it kind of begs you to wonder, this is probably where the key is going to be at, right? Mike, Will, Lucas, Max, and Elle, they're kind of speculating that maybe Billy's possessed by the Mind Flayer. So they end up locking him in the sauna at the local pool. He ends up being possessed. He breaks out, and him and Elle have this big fight. Mike is in a situation where he's about to get like completely destroyed by Billy. Elle uses her powers against him and throws him through the wall. He runs back to the little area that the Mind Flayer is possessing people in. So mid-season, everyone's being possessed, and it's creating this big creature that's going to end up going after Elle. Episode 5, it's revealed that Hopper and Joyce are actually going to these properties to try to figure out what's going on, and they end up taking Alexi, building these generators that kind of help power the machine. Take Alexi hostage, and then they end up going all the way to Murray Bauman, clear in Illinois, because he's the closest person that they know that can actually speak Russian, so they can actually try to translate what this guy is saying. And the base that Dustin, Erica, Robin, and Steve are in, they see the key, and they see they're trying to force and open a gate for the Upside Down, which completely destroys everything that's been built up to this point in season 1 and 2. And the group go to the hospital to try to go to see Miss Driscoll to figure out what's truly going on. She ends up not being there. And Tom and Bruce, people that work for the newspaper that Nancy and Jonathan work at, they're also possessed. Nancy and Jonathan end up killing both of them. And then they kind of like just dissipate into this goo, and they form into one creature that ends up trying to attack them. As this is happening, Elle and Mike finally like have a nice talk, and they kind of are not at each other's throats at all times now. and they kind of at least build more of a bond than what they were having after the breakup. Okay, episode 6, Steve and Robin, they're taken hostage, and they end up getting drugged. The Russians are convinced that they're working for someone, trying to get into the base, when they're really not, so they end up drugging Steve and Robin in an attempt to get information out of them. Still doesn't work. And then they end up getting rescued by Dustin and Erica. And they flee out and go back to the elevator, getting out of the lab, or getting out of the base with the use of a Russian key card that helps use all the technology that they're using within the base. Alexei finally reveals to Hopper, Joyce, and Murray the Russians are in fact trying to force open a gate at the mall. They decide they gotta go back. They gotta go back to Indiana, Hawkins, as soon as possible to try to save the kids, get this mission of opening the gate done. And then it's revealed that Mike is getting really upset at everyone for over-relying on Elle for her powers, because we know that Elle gets drained every time she uses her powers, and they're so concerned with Elle having to use her powers at all times against the Mind Flayer, the gate. It's going to get to a point where, what if they can't use her forever? Once again, Elle tries to find Billy, try to really figure out the location of the Mind Flayer, but Billy ends up sensing her. So now the Mind Flayer knows exactly where she is at all times. The Mind Flayer has her location, so she's being tracked at all times. At this point, enough people have been possessed to form into the creature. It breaks out of the little mill that they're hiding up in, and it goes to hunt down Elle. Episode 7 and the start. It's the Mind Flayer has reached Hopper's cabin, where the group's holding up in, ends up being attacked, and it ends up biting Elle's leg, and it puts a piece of the Mind Flayer inside her leg, which ends up being the main plot point for this episode. They try to treat her up at the local supermarket and get some supplies to kind of heal the wound, because at this point they don't know about the creature. But her scar is getting to the point where it's bleeding so much it's going to cause further issues if they don't figure it out. And then while this is happening, Mike and Elle both hear Dustin over the walkie-talkie that they're in the mall. They have to get there as soon as possible. After they've escaped the Russian lab, they end up hiding up in the movie theater, because since it's part of the mall, most malls, they have movie theaters, so they're hiding up in the theater. But then Steve and Robin, since they're drugged, they run out while Dustin and Erica aren't paying attention. They end up puking out this drug stuff, and then they're back to their normal state. Steve reveals his feelings for Robin. She doesn't exactly reciprocate because she likes girls. She doesn't like guys. Lets down Steve in a way that, she is not interested in him specifically because that's not her type. That's the main kind of breaker. But she does reveal she does like Steve, just not in that way. Then Hopper and Joyce, they get back to Hawkins. They first head to this fair that they're holding for 4th of July, because that's what they assume the kids are at. But they're not. Russians are there, though, so they end up getting chased through there. Escape with a walkie-talkie from one of the Russians. Revealed they are, in fact, at the mall. And as this is happening, I should mention, Alexei does unfortunately get shot by Grigori. At the end of the episode, this is when it's revealed that Elle does, in fact, have the creature in her leg. So she has to get that out. And so as we go into episode 8, she forces it out of her leg with her powers, but it uses so much that it completely rids her of her powers. She no longer has those. In this process, they finally get reunited with Murray, Hopper, and Joyce. And so they tell Hopper, Murray, Joyce everything they've learned about these Russians, the Mind Flayer, the gate. So they decide they're going to go into the Russian base. They're going to shut it down themselves. Except they don't want to just turn the machine off. They want to explode it so that way it can't be used again. Unfortunately, Grigori, he's kind of trying to shut this plan down. So then him and Hopper have this big fight. Hopper ends up getting the upper hand, throws Grigori straight to the machine, and it completely disintegrates all of his body, except it's just kind of taken the machine down to an extent where now there's lasers completely circling the entire room from where the gate is, the key, and where Joyce is. So now he can't escape. He's just locked in that area. Shown that, unfortunately, Hopper's not going to make it out of this one. So Joyce has to explode the machine, killing Hopper. Supposedly, at least. The creature ends up showing back up to the mall as this is all happening, and it tries to kill Elle, but Billy ends up making the sacrifice. He puts his body in front of Elle and ends up getting completely stabbed by all the Mind Flayer's tentacles. And it kills Billy, but it saves Elle for now. But then, just in time, they destroy the gate, the key actually. They destroy the key, shutting the gate. The Mind Flayer dies, unfortunately, also leaving Billy dead. But even though supposedly Hopper died, supposedly at least, we get this shot of Kamchatka, Russia, which is where they have a Demogorgon, and they use it to kill this random Russian. But during this scene, they say, not the American. Well, in translation. They say it in Russian, but in translated to, not the American. So, before season 4 came out, it was speculated. This could have been literally anything. Because at the end of, after they destroy the gate, Murray's nowhere to be seen. He's just not anywhere to be seen yet after they escape. So it was speculated at first that maybe Murray could have been the American. But then we all know it's just Hopper. This is where we have that time jump after everything. It's about October time. And it's revealed that Elle is now living with the Byers because now Hopper's gone, at least for now. So she can no longer stay with Hopper. She's been staying with the Byers, but the Byers no longer feel safe with Hawkins. So they're going to move away. And Hopper and Elle is going to go with them. Mike and Elle haven't really talked much, but right before they leave, Elle specifically restates a time from while they're trying to kill the Mind Flayer and everything. Mike specifically said to everyone he loved Elle, but Elle wasn't in the room at the time, but she did still hear it. And then Elle decides to kiss him and say she loves him too. So they end up getting back together right before moving away. So it ends up creating this long distance relationship, but at least we know that Mike and Elle have their kind of happy ending for season 3 at least. That is season 3. It's got its moments for both comedy and just making you purely upset. So it is a sad season, but it's also a fun season. Given that, next episode we're going to go into season 4. Probably episode 1 through 6, and then 7 through 9 will be in the next video after that. Because those episodes are really long. They are not... Season 4, each episode is like at least over an hour long. And it's those final episodes, it gets hour and a half to 2.5 hours. So let's split that in two. Episode 1 through 6 of season 4 will for sure be next video though. So hope you guys are excited for that. Hope you guys have an amazing day. And I'll see you guys all next time. And remember, this has been the Hawkins Files.